Beautiful. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for our panel discussion with filmmaker Safaa Fathy and Kay Dickinson. My name is Annie. I'm one of the programmers at Maysles Documentary Center, who is hosting tonight's discussion in collaboration with Tomas Art Justice and Art East. This is a part of the series Saved from the Waters, films by Safaa Fathy, which will be showcasing 9 of her films on the Maysles website at maysles.org through October 31st. So they're all available for free streaming, and we will also be hosting an additional 2 discussions as a part of this series in the beginning and end of October. On October 4th, we will have a discussion between poet and translator Mona Karim and Safaa Fathy. And on October 25th, we will be having a conversation with Shireen Hafez and Safaa Fathy. So you can find additional information about those discussions and RSVP to join us at those dates as well at maysles.org. You can also feel free to check out many other films that we're showing at maysles.org, as well as our upcoming Black Panther Film Festival, 13th annual, and our Congo and Harlem Film Festival, both happening in October as well. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to tonight's, I would say panelists, but this is more of a conversation. So tonight's conversationalists, Safaa Fathy, who is the filmmaker whom this retrospective focuses on, is an Egyptian French poet, documentary filmmaker, playwright, and essayist. Born in Egypt, she moved to France in 1981 and obtained her PhD from the Sorbonne in Paris in 1993. She was a director at the International College of Philosophy from 2010 until 2016. Fathy is the author of the plays Aquarius, I hope I say this right, Incius and La Frontera, and Ordali Terrere. Whoops, not sure how you say those. In conversation with her tonight is Kay Dickinson, who is a professor of cinema at Concordia University in Montreal. Her most recent publications include Arab Cinema Travels, Transnational Syria, Palestine, Dubai, and Beyond, and Arab and Film Video Manifestos. Research is dedicated to thinking through how various media function amid and in resistance to the machinations of transnational global capital. So Kay will be leading us through the discussion, and then we will be accepting questions from the audience. About halfway through the discussion, you can submit any questions that you might like to ask Safaa in the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom screen. And we will field those questions. So without further ado, I turn it over to you all.
Thank you, Annie. And it's a really great pleasure to be talking to Safaa Fathy, especially as she's such a polymath, a poet, a philosopher, and many things besides. But as the first of these 3 conversations, and the one that's most cited, let's say, within cinema, those will be the themes I'll be really focusing on tonight, and I'll leave those other discussions to the further kind of events that are being held around her work. So I'd really like to start by honouring this very insistent priority in your work, and that it spans all of your oeuvre, to remember and to memorialize. Your films carry this kind of overwhelming sense that you urgently need to save something marginalized, something under threat. And for example, in Mohammad Saved from the Waters, it's your brother's memory in the last phases of his life. In Razaya, it's the dying art form of female live performance of dance at rural weddings. So I'd love it if you could please speak a little bit to, I guess scholars call this the archival impulse, but I think it's broader than that, and particularly the capacity that film has to, as a medium, to open up questions of memory and memorializing, please.
Yeah, thank you, Kay. We make things with what we are. So what I am is someone who lost many things, and I make things with the idea that these things lost has to be memorable. It means I'm looking for what I have lost to make it alive again. What I have lost is not necessarily what I have lost. It's like what people know. That is an experience like the experience.
Uh-oh.
Safaa, I think we lost you.
Yeah, but you're back
Yeah,
again.
well, it's a problem that that situation needed with internet is not very easy. So I'm very sorry about that. Um, I'm trying to answer Kay. I don't know how far I went in saying what I was saying, but I was saying that we make things with what we are, what we have lost. And what we
Safaa,
have
I'm
lost
sorry.
is not necessarily what we have lost.
I think
You
we're
don't
still
hear
having
me.
trouble. Yeah, maybe if you could put the mic closer to your mouth again. We're just having trouble
You
hearing.
hear me better there. Yeah,
Oh,
you hear
Beautiful.
me
Thank you
better
so
there.
much. I appreciate it.
Okay, fine.
um,
Safaa, are you still with us?
still.
Safaa, can you hear us?
Hello.
Safaa, are you there? Okay. So we'll just give her a minute. Maybe she's reorganizing.
Ah, hello again.
Hi.
We've lost the muffled noise, so that's great. If you are you
I don't see any images. Hello?
hi.
We had you there.
Hi. Do you hear me there?
Yes, that's great. Yeah.
Hello? Hello?
Hello. We're hearing you now, which is fantastic.
Oh, yeah,
Safaa, if you maybe wanted to
thanks.
mute your
Thanks.
video, it might give a little more bandwidth to be able to hear you with the internet connection.
Okay, fine. I was just saying that, like, we're trying to find, we're trying to keep things which we may lose, like, not just me, but like many other people. In some cases, it's me because it concerns my brother, but in other cases, it's not me. It's like whatever, the French intellectual community or whatever, like Maxime Rodinson, or the memory of my own memory of a story which I've been a witness of in countryside, where things happened when they were beautiful and I thought they were beautiful. I hope you're hearing me. I'm not sure.
Yeah, we are.
So these places or these things, like other people or events or social events, basically, or possibility of events or traditions. Um, all these things, like some of them, we live in a world where things disappear and appear very quickly. And in my world, in a very, very everlasting, very fast changing society like Egyptian society or even the French society, we live in very fast changing societies. And, more, the, the, the the thing I notice more is the change more than the stability. And the change is so fast, everywhere, so fast. And things get lost very quickly, and memories get lost very quickly. I thought maybe somehow I want to a little bit make the pace a little slower. And when you make the pace a little slower, you try to keep the memory of these things one likes or loves, or the people one likes or love, or the events one people loves or like. So it's like one of the pulses, the impulses behind my work was to find out where the things are getting lost and keep them as revenants in images, in narratives, and so on.
And to me, you seem to do that by avoiding the typical traps that film often uses. And I'm thinking in particular about Dardasha, which for those who haven't watched it, is a remarkable documentary about the island of Socotra off Yemen. And for me, that film it could be, let's say, ethnographic. It could be a sort of museum piece. But in actual fact, I find that you make this wonderful melee of fact and fiction, the stories they're telling, the myths, the sort of fabrications, and you play it against an ethnographic film impulse using black and white footage. But you're doing something different there, and I was just curious as to what made you come to those decisions about the filmmaking process.
It really depends on in each film. Each film, it has its own story, its own story experience, its own story and narrative itself. Socotra was a very particular moment in my life, and I thought like Socotra saving me as I saving something of it, basically. There was a relationship, and that relationship was very profound, although I didn't know the place. So when I went there, to be rescued and, rescue something of it. And when I arrived there, I got the impression that I arrived a little bit, either a minute too late or a minute too early. Something like it's about to finish. There was something about to finish there. And I was so in love with the place and I was so in love with the people that I just filmmaking was almost secondary to the experience. So I was documenting the experience of being in the encounter of that place. And the encounter of the place was not just with its people, it was also its landscape, its trees, its seas. I almost drowned there. I was in an area where some of the footage is still in the film. We're filming fish underwater. So I was filming fish underwater, and all of a sudden the fish disappeared. Obviously there was a storm, and I didn't realize there was a storm. And then at one moment I realized there was a storm and I'm not reaching the shore. And somehow, by miracle, I reached the shore. And then I discovered there were two girls drowned the day before, exactly in the same place. And so I got out, and everybody was packing my stuff, thinking that I'm already dead. So they're, to take me back, I don't know where. But I got the impression that was something of resurrection of some sort took place there. And it was fascinating for me, the whole experience, going up mountains and, sleeping in a tent where it actually rains inside the tent because the condensation is such that it rains inside the tent, and all sorts of things. And he walked for hundreds of miles, non-stop, because in fact the place where no cars is a very ecological place. Now it's disappeared all this. Now Dubai had claimed the place. The Emirates had claimed the place because it belonged to Yemen, and Yemen was under siege, under Saudi siege. And of course, couldn't provide, basically, because most of the things come from mainland. And it was also nearby Dubai, where they were buying all the seafood, where they can't find, they found it. So it's a place where uh, some memory is lost and to be found. That is something, that they say it is the place, the real place of the Phoenix legend is there, where, I'm looking for it without looking for it. And people say, this bird is there, but the bird is, oh, can we get you some, can go and get you some. It's like where absolute fiction and reality are just like, there's no borders between them, there is no lines between them, it's just like they overlap. And fiction and reality are more or less the same thing. And I played the game. And it's a film where I play the game. It's really, I do play the game. And when you sing at night time, I sing with them, and that's it. And then there is a fictionalized story what I'm looking at, and then found out, there was whatever a dream which I end up the film with. It's a very naive film. It's naive in its structure, it's naive in its orientation, but at the same time, it has something very profound behind it, which is to do with resurrection.
No, for sure. And I mean, what you've just said takes me in two directions, and I hope I will maintain them. But one to do with closeness with your subjects, and another to do with joining in, and they are connected. But I'll start with the latter, because you're joining in there. You're playing, like you say, playing the game, and you're indulging that understanding of reality. But there's also that element in the Tahrir, raise your voice, which is again for everyone joining us. It's an unfinished project. Can you still hear me, Safaa? Because your screen is frozen. Are you still there?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Okay, so but one.
Yes, I do. I hear you. It's like
great.
A little bit.
The first thing that struck me with that film, if we call it that, is that you're joining in with the protesters. The film is, you can hear your voice with all the shouts and all the chants that the revolution has generated, which is remarkable. That's such an unusual position for a filmmaker to take. So yeah, I'm very interested to know about your levels of participation and your closeness to your subjects.
It depends which film. For example, Tahrir was a film, I was more or less chased out of Egypt, it's like, for political activity. I'm a political person. I've been in politics since a very young age. And I left believing that there should be, I am a libertarian, that there'll be processes, more a libertarian. And I had spent already something like 35 years in Egypt. I wouldn't, in the sense that I still went back, managed to go back. Every time, always with a known heart that something might happen. I wouldn't go through the borders, but I always went back and I always went through, if you want. But the awe was there. The pain was always suspended in there and hovering over my head. And all of a sudden I went, and it's as if it was a rendezvous with my destiny in a way. It's a rendezvous with something I was searching for a long time before. So I was in that rendezvous, and I didn't miss it. I said, I'm not going to miss that rendezvous. I'm there with it. And I wrote a book about that, but that was later. But at the very, very specific moment, I had the camera and I used it as a third eye in a kind of way. And I used it. And it was my way to participate with the people. So it was not being a filmmaker looking at the people and making them speak. It was like, I'm involved there, and this is my testimony of my own involvement. That's why I call it a journal, basically. It's a journal. And of course, I didn't finish it for very obvious reasons, because this story came short of itself. You know, it's like finished badly. And I wouldn't finish a story well when it finished badly in reality, which is a story of reality, you know, even if we fictionalize the most we can. But, you know, here we are. We come to the limits of what documentary is and what fiction is. I could have fictionalized it, and I said, I stopped at the moment where Mubarak stepped down or ousted it. And here we are, you know, we have some victory. But I knew very well there was no victory, even that day. And I wrote it when we had to write. I knew there was no victory. I knew this was not it. It was too naive, it was too fictionalized, it was too, the narrative was too perfect. It was a film, I think, I don't know by who, it was a story of a murder, whatever, and it was like, he says, too symmetrical, it's too profound, too perfect, too symmetrical. It's too symmetrical. It was too symmetrical. There's something not right about this symmetry of the whole thing, you know. So I decided not to, not to finish, to make rough images and rough sounds and rough cuts and rough everything, to say, yeah, I was there, I was involved there, but it's too short of anything which can be concluded. Well, short of a conclusion, there's no conclusion.
And I mean, in some ways, it's a companion to my eyes between, firstly, Mohammad Saved from the Waters, in that's a deeply political film in a different register, one that deals with pollution, state violence at that level of removing healthcare, removing care for the environment. And then, on the other hand, a film that came out more recently, which is I Left My Eyes Behind, which has the same immediacy as Tahrir, but it's doing different things. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about how this broad sense of politics weaves in and out of your films in different ways.
I left my eyes behind the Nessie, more of a Nessie thing.
Sure.
Just like I need to
Safaa, we're just going to mute your video quickly just to help attempt to improve the audio quality. Just a heads up. Sorry, continue.
Okay. Do you hear me now?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, right. It's but I left my eyes behind the Nessie already. It's a Nessie about it has the immediacy aspect to it. But it's more settled in time than Tahrir. It's not the immediate experience of what I am experiencing of the event, but rather is like trying to relate to an event which has already passed for the protagonist, which has already passed, and find out how they can retranslate that event into some other form. And I chose for that a literary form. I wanted that experience of pain to be retranslated into a literary form, which was absolutely not the case of Tahrir. The case of Tahrir was like, we are talking politics, we are behaving politics, we are speaking politics, we are shouting politics. Here, no. Here we are going to speak about our desires because already we have survived, because we are survivors. And because we are survivors, there are things which made us survive. What are these things which made us survive? I am almost not very much interested in the event which made them survive, but how they survived these traumas. And how they survive these traumas, this is where I thought poetry can find its own place, its room, its recurrence, its possibility. It's even legitimacy. This is where poetry can happen. And for me, that's where poverty happens. It happens when survival takes place. So I was doing that way. And Mohammad Saved the Motors, you can say it's both of them at the same time. It was, on the one hand, the survival process, what took place, what happened. At the same time, the film took place also over many years. A lot of the footage took place about 5 years of time. So there is the immediacy of the moments of pain, somebody testifying about his own possibility. This is Cairo, so Cairo doesn't sleep, so you always hear sounds here. They're hanging around in the street there for some reason. Anyway, so there is someone is suffering from very painful experience and testifying about it. And then he's already passed. And then his family is coming to remember that moment and survive the moment of his disappearance. So many moments of this survival, if you want. It's like, so there's all this mingling of survival. Plus the survival of the Egyptian society as per se, because the Egyptian society had to survive its own corruption, to survive its own mise à mort, as we say in French. That is politics which make people die without knowing why. And there are many testimonies in the film to that effect. So you have these survivors mingled together, and with some kind of possibility of redemption. There was a revolution which is also surviving itself because, well, the revolution is gone. That's one of the things. The revolution had died already in 2011, September 2011, which is like less than 6 months after it happened. Call it revolution, call it uprising, call it whatever.
Yeah, no, and at some point there you use the word testimony actually in relation to Mohammad Saved from the Waters, and that's something that's very clear also, and it takes us very clearly back to the idea of archiving and preserving a voice, and a voice that's urgent. And that film is I would sorry, Tahrir is very much a film that's, people that keep calling on you to make their testimonies, keep trying to show you things, keep involving you in the process of recording. And yeah, I'd just like to hear a little bit more about how that was guiding you, and what you were feeling in relationship to those very directive impulses from the people on the streets.
I was so much part of it. Yeah. I mean, I was so much part of it. And since I looked a little bit different from, let's say, and since there was absolutely no woman filming, and very hardly anybody filming apart from the journalists coming from here and there, but somebody staying in the square, going everywhere and filming at the same time. That was very rare people doing that. And in my case, I didn't see anybody, but obviously the square is very big and there were too many people, but I didn't see them. And it was like, we are in a group, we are part of the same story. And since you are part of the same story, document what we've got to say. We document what you've got to say. We have got things to say and you have to document them. And it was like an injunction. It was almost like a moral injunction. Do it. We're telling you that, do it. And while, for example, if you try to, I'm sure you're aware of the situation in Egypt, and when you film in Egypt, it's very difficult to film in Egypt. Where it's incredibly difficult to film in Egypt, in the streets of Egypt. At that very particular moment, it was so easy. It was just like I had the camera and I had this microphone stretched on it, and since I had a filter on that microphone to cut the sound and the wind, and somehow that filter disappeared. So I put some kind of stuff which like a bandage thing. So as if the microphone was wounded by itself, sort of like I bandaged the microphone. So when I walked around, they always say, "Oh, it's a wounded camera." So it's like, well, since if so many people were wounded anyway, it was like almost like, I'm showing them that I have also a wounded camera. She's walking around with a wounded camera.
There's a very powerful resonance to that idea in general.
Yeah. It was like I had a bandage over the microphone, which hanging on top of the computer, the camera. So it was like that, and there was that sense of community, which like very rarely happened in Egypt. So it was a huge sense of community, and that sense of community had made sense, and that sense was that we speak to each other like, I filmed later. Like after the 18 days, I filmed in Mohammed Mahmoud street event, which is like February, November 2011. And I filmed later afterwards in Egypt. And I found much more difficulty filming later than at this particular moment. This moment was a moment of communion. Uh, that's why it's such a naive moment as well. It's like a utopian naive moment, very romantic, although it was very violent. Though. And it was like, this in this communion was possible that people can be exposed without being ashamed, and somehow the shame was not there. While Egyptian society, it's an Egyptian society, it's a society of shame, of being ashamed, and a society of shame. Shame is a very powerful moral drive, either for it or against it, or to avoid it, or to carry it, whatever. So it there was no shame. Very, 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 very rare moment in Egyptian society when we didn't feel shame.
This brings me to actually another film, and I'm mindful that there may be questions, and I'm going to invite people to post their questions. But while that's happening, I'll ask a question that relates to me very closely to that. And that's to bring us back to your film about the dancers, Ghazaya, and because you are dealing with shame there. You're dealing with a changing moment in women's bodies and their public performance in Egypt. And at the same time, you have the same closeness that we feel in these other films. You have an extraordinary capacity to be with these dancers, to communicate with them, and they're often not so open to that kind of intrusion from a filmmaker. I'd love to hear some more about how you got into that world and how you established that proximity to them.
Very strangely, because I don't know, probably I have such an identity, an elastic identity myself, that it's like I don't start from any fixed position. I mean, I just relate to people where they are, because because this is how I am. I don't start from any fixed position. I am multiple. I know that I am multiple, and I love the dancers when I was young, when I was little, and I love the whole story. So I communicated that, and although I wasn't that successful in that story, because I was much more closer to the dancer in the countryside than the dancer in Cairo. The dancer in Cairo was much more opaque, as they say in French. She was very close to any kind of transparency or even truthfulness. She told me stories about her life, which probably were not completely true. You know, she was she had an image and she wanted to keep it to herself. But what I tried to perceive was not the truthfulness of her story, because I knew she's going to lie about it, but the truthfulness of what she feels about her story. I thought maybe I tried to communicate something out of that. While the countryside dancer, she opened her house, she opened her heart, We were with her, her husband, her family. It was much easier to speak to her and to relate to her because she didn't have a constructed narrative, which she was trying to sell. She didn't have that one, while the other one did have one. Um, so I'm not sure I managed to be very close to the other one, but yeah, to the countryside dancer, I was probably much closer. And I would try to just like, okay, you're not going to tell me the right story, which I know you're not going to tell me the right story, but at least give me the right emotions. And this is what I try to get. Your emotions, you're not going to lie about your emotions. You're going to lie about your story. Fine, I know you're lying, but let's go somewhere else. Let's find out that let's resituate the story in the level of perception rather than the level of veracity or truthfulness of narrative, if you want. So I try to do that. It's like it depends when you are meeting people and how you relate to them. Like all of us, if you, for example, if you have students, you know how to relate to them. You can figure out what their background is. I think it's to do with like humility as well. One has to be, with huge humility to make films. I think it's a lesson of humility every time, which is like incomparable lesson of humility. Because whatever you don't know, basically. You think you know things, but you don't know them, in fact. So you think you know people, you don't know them. So every time it's like a story starts again, trying to find out about what you know, if it's true or not, with the people you think um, represent that truthfulness or not. And every time, you find out that what you know is wrong, and there is something else you've got to learn about. And we learn about it, and we keep learning, and we keep learning, and we keep learning. And that's why very often I notice when I make a film about someone, and this is like, goes as far as my brother, as Derrida, Maximo Danson, the people in the camps Kurdistan, as well as the girls, the dancers. They all have ascendancy on you. They always can tell you off. All of them could do it.
Mm-hmm.
They always have ascendancy because they're teaching you to do something. So I always noticed this. It's like, and I don't know why on earth, when you start making a film about someone, that someone treats you badly.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because they think you think about them, but in fact you know nothing about them. So they are very upset because they want to tell you what they are, which is nothing to do what you know.
And how did that work with Derrida? Because, in many ways that's perhaps your, oh, actually we have a question coming in. So I'm going to tie the two together because I was going to ask, ultimately when we're talking about Derrida, the sort of probably the most articulate speaker on topics of where, what is truth, or what sorts of that there are no origins in this simple way, all these things which are the underpinnings of a biography film, and everything you've talked about is thrown up in the air by Derrida's own work. And then I'll just a question here that's come through, which I'll read aloud from somebody in the audience who says, can you talk a little bit about your stylistic choices for Derrida's Elsewhere? It's so interesting and even a bit uncomfortable at times to spend so much intimate time with him. Images of his face, hands, etc., especially as he talks through really complex ideas of deconstruction and selfhood. So a fantastic question to draw us to a close.
Well, there are not many pictures of his hands nor for his face. I know them very well, and I know there are pictures of the hands when he's talking about Maranos in courtyard in Toledo, and this is particularly the only ones, that only shots of his hands at that very moment, and there is a a close-up at the very end of the film. So these are the two things which are to do with that. Otherwise, I have medium shots and I have long shots. I have lots of shots walking, or him walking, which are long shots, not close-ups. Um, and I have medium shots very often too. So it's like whoever was asking that question, thanks for asking it. You notice, obviously, these are overwhelming things, but they're two shots, no more than two shots.
They must be very striking, though.
Well, obviously, he was ever her or she were overwhelmed by them, but really is one shot of the two hands, absolutely one shot. I know what it is as well. So the stylistic choice was there. Basically, you're talking. I worked on the presence absence questions.
Mm.
He's speaking a lot, and he's a philosopher, and he speaks a lot. And I'm working on with a medium which is 16 millimeter, which is I don't have much footage, and it's not video.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to find a stylistic way device which makes me speak without speaking. So I cannot sit there and film him speaking with 16 millimeter costing hundreds and hundreds of whatever, euros or francs, whatever it was, without finding out a stylistic device which makes me make the film in that medium without having to ruin the country or the production company. So the device is that I filmed him silent, that is not speaking in many ways. So I filmed him walking, I filmed him thinking. I tried to film the meditation moment, the stance of meditation, of relation to space, of relation to movement and time. I tried to film that without words. And the words I recorded, sometimes I had directly in sync, but sometimes I didn't. And I used this motive, which is fundamental motive in this philosophy, which is the present absence motive, by having these meditative moments of contemplation in space, using the words which can correspond to this moment. And the people who can watch the film will find out that a lot of things are off, sound off, not of images. Like I remember the editor, who had a first editor who actually desisted and left, and the second one came. But the first one said, I don't know how to do it. We're not going to edit him speaking over his own image. I said, what? Yes, we're going to do that. She said, no, we cannot have him speaking over him, because like the idea is that if somebody is speaking, the image will be somebody else. It will be something else. It's like an illustration of the words of that person. But there, I would have him walking or doing this or doing that, or reading or whatever, and he will be speaking, or it will be his own voice over his own silence. And that was a stylistic device I found, which was dictated by economy, not just economy. Economy means an economy of style. Uh, that I think this is a main feature of that film, a really main feature. The off sound over the off image.
Wow.
Or the in image, call it that way. The off sound over the in image. That was something which I used extensively in that film. Then there are, of course, moments where he is in sync, where he's speaking directly to the camera. So we have that. I tried to also to integrate many ideas, actually. try, for example, to make the idea of prison, it sounds as if it's something to do in space, you know, to do with space, not just to do with in confinement within walls, but also to do with the ruin of space, you know, because prison is a confinement in space which is ruined already. I tried that. I tried an idea of verticality, for example, ascension. There is also ascension in that film, you know, either in a lift or on stairs or whatever, you know, it's like there is ascension, there's something going up. I try to do that because there's also a lot of his philosophy about the quasi-transcendentality. So there's like, you know, how to the sublime. Yeah, he says, you know, what is high and what is low. You know, the sublime is what is as high as you can get, and it's still lower than the sky. I try to do all these things, you know, as much as I could.
And on that, I'm afraid to drag us from the sublime to the end, and that I need everyone to know that Safaa has a flight to catch very early tomorrow, and she's already in Egypt on Egyptian time. So we're to call a sort of close to this particular event. But there's so many more questions for you, Safaa. I mean, particularly around space and confinement, as you just said, absence and presence. And I very heartily encourage everyone to join. This is the first of 3 events to come along to the other 2 and talk to Safaa about those other elements of her work. And I'll hand us over to Annie, who will be closing us for this particular evening. But thank you so much.
Oh, well, thank you, Kay. Thank you all. You know, it was really wonderful. And I'm very happy to do that just the night before I leave Cairo. So it was like, you know, to mark the moment of my departure is good.
Very appropriate. Thank you so much, Safaa. Thank you, Kay.
Thank you.
Yes, do be sure to check out those other discussions coming up October 4th and October 25th. You can find them at maysles.org. Thank you to our collaborators, Tomas and Art Justice and Art East on tonight's discussion. And I hope everyone has a beautiful evening. Thank you again.
Okay, thank you so much.
Safe travels, Safaa.
Okay, thank you.